For decades, North Wales was the hunting ground for a mysterious, sadistic attacker.
Men were getting attacked by a tall man who wore black leather clothing.
And in the 1990s, the man in black graduated to serial killing.
Killed without any mercy at all.
Stabbed 9 times.
Hiding behind a respectable facade, the killer led a sordid double life.
I cannot believe that this turned into the House of Horrors.
There was whips, there was rubber truncheons.
Blood splatters on the walls and on the ceilings.
But what made this monster? Was he born to kill? In the mid-1990s, the popular stretch of coast from Kinmel Bay to Pensarn in North Wales attracted thousands of holidaymakers looking for their annual dose of relaxation in the summer sun.
When the holiday season started, you get the people coming from Manchester, Stoke, Liverpool. So a right mixed bag of people come and spend their holidays in the caravans.
It's very much a tourism area. There's no major industry in the area. To put it quite simply, it closes down in winter.
When the caravan sites close down, the area becomes more of a village community and gets more of a village feel to it. It's reasonably crime-free.
You could get the burglaries, you get the drunk drivers, but it was just the ticking over crime.
On December the 17th, 1995, 35-year-old father of 2, Anthony Davis, had been looking forward to Christmas, but had put his festive preparations on hold to help out an aunt in need.
She wanted to go up to the graveside, you know, to see where her husband was buried, take some flowers up there. And unfortunately, on the way out of the cemetery, she's fallen and she broke a leg.
Anthony and his wife Sheila would stay with their aunt at the local hospital all day. It was a typical act of kindness from the warm-hearted family man.
You'd like him straight away. He's the type of guy that you can sort of get to know within seconds. You wouldn't get a word in edgeways with him half the time.
He was really funny. He was absolutely full of life and he was always playing with us. He was absolutely brilliant. He was like an older brother. I think that's how close we all were, really.
Having taken his aunt back home that afternoon, Anthony wanted to check up on her once more.
And that night, he said he was going back to see her, just to pay her a late call. And it was when he didn't return home from seeing her that the family became concerned.
I got a phone call, I think it was about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, and it was Sheila, and she said, "Is Anthony there, Malcolm?" And I said, "Good God, no." She said, "He hasn't come home." I said, "Right, I'll go and have a look." And I went out in my car to look for him.
As their concerns increased, Malcolm would be joined by Anthony's brother, Gary, as they scoured the local area. But with still no sign of the 35-year-old, the family reported the matter to the police. PC Phil Greaves was just starting out on his early shift.
Night shift just mentioned to me that there was a person missing. They mentioned the vehicle he was missing in. And I just took it as an adult missing, could go anywhere.
Anthony's car was eventually found at nearby Pensarn Beach. Former Detective Constable Dave Morris recalls the scene in the deserted car park.
During the early hours of the morning, local police officers came across Tony's vehicle, which was parked in this sort of vicinity here, across the road from the amusement arcade. And Tony wasn't in the car, there's no sign of him.
I had a quick look round. I couldn't see him sleeping in doorways or anything like that, so I just jumped onto the sea wall.
The tide was out, but was coming in at that point in time. And as I walked onto the beach, I had a general search of the beach area, and I noticed a shape further down the beach.
You could see it was a person, head towards the sea, feet up the beach, quite close to the water's edge.
But the policeman's initial assessment was interrupted.
I heard a vehicle stop, looked up, and a guy jumped over the wall rather quickly, comes running down the beach towards me.
It was Gary Davis, the man who had spent the last few hours frantically searching for his missing brother, Anthony.
He went down to have a look, and they were dragging him out of the sea. And Gary said, "Shine a light on him." And they shined a light. And he said, "That's my brother," he said.
It was apparent that Anthony Davis had not died of natural causes.
So we moved the body up the beach, and only while moving the body up the beach that his jumper came up and saw the horrific wounds and realised, you know, he'd been stabbed umpteen times.
There were signs that Tony had put up a fight. There was a lot of debris moved about on the beach. There was evidence in this area here of a struggle. There was blood on the stones, on the rocks, and eventually Tony Davis was stabbed to death and he collapsed and died on the beach here.
News of the brutal murder soon reached the victim's close-knit family.
That day, I'll never forget it. It was horrible. We just couldn't digest it. It just wasn't right. We couldn't believe somebody's murdered him. He didn't have an enemy.
You'll never forget that pain that we suffered at that time. No, I'll never forget the way my family were different. Everything changed in the click of the fingers, it just changed. Our life just fell apart.
As investigators searched for clues to Anthony's murder, they were aware that Pensarn Beach had been the scene of unprovoked violence before. Rumoured to be a gay meeting point, several men had suffered attacks by a mystery assailant over the preceding years.
It was described, rightly or wrongly at the time, as a notorious stretch of the beach.
We were aware that there'd been some men attacked on Pensarn Beach, historically, by a tall man who wore black leather clothing and quite violently assaulted and robbed people.
But as the community reeled, one local man appeared firmly focused on business.
I remember his first film, it was Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and that was a really good film, and everybody was so excited because it hadn't been out for long.
The Christmas holiday was traditionally a busy time of year for local cinema owner Peter Moore.
At one stage he mentioned that he'd had, I think it was 1,200 people through the doors in 1 week.
Championed as a saviour of the big screen, Moore had opened his first local cinema 5 years previously.
He began by taking over the old cinema at Baggilt. He bought some old theatre seats from Inrill, I believe, and put those in. Understandably, the communities were only too pleased that their cinemas were opening in their areas.
I thought he was great, and a lot of other people, the residents in the village, should think he was great. He was a very laid-back person, had a good manner about him, very polite. He was an ideal person to be running the cinema.
Film enthusiast Peter Moore had been born 49 years previously, in 1946.
The Moore family moved to Kinmore Bay from St Helens when Peter Moore was a very young child.
Catherine Hughes lived next door to the Moores and their imposing custom-built home, Darlington House.
Kinmel Bay was very rural. It only consisted of a post office, a chip shop, a newsagent's and a confectioner's. Darlington House was the most prominent building, but everywhere else was fields.
They were definitely well respected in the area, and they would have been one of the more affluent people in Kinmel Bay at that point in time.
There was no other building around that was like this, and the status that it gave to the Moore family, it was almost like they were the lord and lady of the manor, and Peter was their, you know, up-and-coming prince, if you like.
Peter Moore's parents made their money running a successful hardware shop on the ground floor of the property.
I think it was more basically an ironmonger's from memory. Apart from groceries, I suppose he sold everything. And when you went in, it was pretty cluttered, like kettles and things hanging off hooks.
As a boy, Peter had been doted on by his mother.
Mrs. Moore loved Peter unconditionally. I don't think she believed that Peter could do anything wrong. I think her love for him was more than her love for Mr. Moore. He loved her to pieces as well.
Peter Moore had always stood out from his peers.
I think it was obvious to others that Peter was gay from when he was a young teenager. Certainly he was different from the other boys. The other boys knew he was different, and I think they treated him accordingly.
Although close to his mother, Peter's relationship with his father appeared very different.
I never saw any affection between Peter and his dad, or Mr. Moore and Mrs. Moore. They were like two separate units.
While the young Peter and his mother spent most of their time together, Ernie, Peter's father, was dedicated to running the successful business.
He was quite large in stature. You could tell that Mr. Moore had been a military man by the way he held himself, and he almost marched. But he liked to drink. He would have a whiskey tipple probably on and off throughout the day. My dad told me not to spend any time alone with him, so I didn't. Don't know why, but that's what I was told to do.
I do remember Mr. Moore, Mrs. Peter's father, coming in, and he was absolutely plastered from alcohol one day, and this was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Peter did mention at some stage that he had been violent towards him.
I think Mr. Moore knew that Peter was gay, and I don't think he liked it. I do think Mr. Moore was probably quite homophobic towards Peter. He didn't tolerate his mannerisms, he didn't tolerate his personality, and he would tell Peter off.
When they're humiliated young, they want to be sure this never happens again. And they will resent the source of that humiliation deeply, whether it's their father, their mother, a teacher, whoever it is, that person is going to become symbolic to them. And when they get to the point where they have enough power to react against some symbol of that source, they will.
Those that knew the industrious cinema owner could never have imagined the dark way his life would play out. During December 1995, the body of 35-year-old Anthony Davis had been found brutally stabbed on Pensarn Beach in North Wales. it began to emerge that a series of attacks had been occurring in the region for decades at the hands of a violent, sadistic man.
I had been aware of various assaults having been reported over the years.
Men were getting attacked during the late hours of the evening.
Apparently, he was jumping out, following people, and he'd batter them.
They were pretty violent attacks. They were generally attacked from behind with what we believe was a rubber kosh.
One or two, I know, of the victims were lucky to survive.
I interviewed one who was so badly hurt that he lived the rest of his life in a nursing home.
This person who was attacked said, I was convinced he was going to kill me. He was definitely going to kill me.
People who've been attacked, they had an idea that of his description, this big bloke and so on, and dressed in black.
Despite police efforts, the mystery assailant had remained at large for more than 20 years. But in 1995, the sadistic violence would reach a whole new level. On the 22nd of September, retired railway worker Henry Roberts had spent the majority of the day at home. It was a routine he had followed since the death of his mother 9 years previously.
He lived in a pretty ramshackle place in Cargailog, a village just a few miles from Holyhead. Locally, it was hinted that he could be gay, but he was a man who was respected.
Henry was a bachelor, a guy who lived, I'd say, all his life. The people that knew Henry regarded him as a recluse, a loner, quite eccentric.
Henry also had a controversial hobby.
It was known that he had this interest in Nazi memorabilia.
As a creature of habit, Henry would leave his ramshackle cottage and take a daily stroll to the local pub.
Henry lived in this location here, but he would walk every day to Cargailog, which is just down the road here, about a quarter mile away, to the pub. And that was his lifestyle. He'd go to the pub every day and walk home back to his cottage.
I think someone said he once spent up to £100 a night on buying drinks, and local people knew that he had a fair amount of cash.
So regular were his visits. When Henry didn't show up at the pub for 3 days in a row, locals became worried.
He hadn't been seen in the pub for a couple of days, so they were concerned for his welfare. Some guys from the pub came here, they came through the gate, walked into the yard, and that's when they found Henry's body. He'd been lying there for some time.
As police arrived on the scene, they were shocked to discover that the 56-year-old had been the victim of murder.
It was a horrific attack, a brutal attack.
Henry Roberts had been stabbed dozens of times.
His trousers had been pulled down. His bare buttocks were on display. And it was quite apparent that he'd been stabbed to the buttocks on a number of occasions.
A post-mortem would reveal that the killer had delayed the fatal blow to prolong the victim's ordeal.
When you stab someone and they don't die, they're in pain. They're suffering, and this is arousing for an individual who's sadistic. He disabled the person, made him suffer, and then after an extended period of time, finally killed the person, just to prolong the sexual stimulation of the entire act.
Investigators had little to go on, but one sighting offered a potential lead.
A van had been seen in the driveway. Not on the night of the murder, but some days before the murder. So there was a lot of concentration on trying to identify the van and the driver of the van.
Local businessman and cinema owner Peter Moore would often crisscross the region by van. 16 years previously, his father, Ernie Moore, had passed away, leaving his 33-year-old son to run the family hardware store with the support of his doting mother.
When his father died and he took over the business, then the business changed really dramatically. They didn't sell as many tools or gardening equipment. It became more like a general store, and he brought in video hire.
It was a busy shop, although I don't think he was making a lot of money. He had a lot of customers coming and going throughout the day. The large supermarket chain had opened about half a mile away from the shop, and I think it had a bit of an adverse effect on his business. So Peter sort of diverged a little bit.
He also ventured into using the upstairs hall and converted it into a disco, and it was called the Black Cat Disco. There was a lot of upset with the local community because they didn't want bright lights late at night and loud music because it wasn't soundproofed.
Peter Moore was also prepared to travel the local area, selling gas to boost his profit margins.
The caravan people could phone him up at 10 o'clock at night and say, Peter, look, I'm run out of gas, and he'd just jump in his van and deliver the gas bottle down there, and then they thought he was a wonderful man.
But it was not all plain sailing for the seemingly amenable shopkeeper. Local policeman Dave Morris would make frequent visits to the Moores' business at Darlington House.
We'd always be called here by Peter. There'd be an incident going on. Generally, it was like a shoplifting offence, damage to his property.
But on entering the shop, the policeman would pick up on a distinct atmosphere.
One of the things I noticed when I used to visit the shop was that the staff were always very reluctant to speak to us. It was quite apparent that Peter was a gay man. The staff that would work for him were normally people he was in a relationship with. I formed the opinion, even then, that Peter was quite a sort of a dominant character.
Fellow shop owner Mike Owen recalls a character who also revelled in the limelight on the shop floor.
A good shopkeeper is an exhibitionist. They have a centre of attraction. They're trying to sell you something. And Peter Moore, I think, was pretty good at that. And I think he enjoyed being centre stage.
Despite Peter's apparent control, his mother Edith remained firmly in charge behind the scenes.
After we'd sort of spoken to Peter and told him that we'd sort of look into his complaint, then we'd have to go and report back to his mother. She seemed to still regard him as her little boy, despite the fact that he was a grown man running a business and providing for his mother.
I think she tried to keep him more of a child. I don't think she actually wanted him to grow up.
Away from the family business, Peter Moore would indulge his lifelong passion for film by renovating and opening the first of 3 local cinemas in 1990. Whilst carrying out some works for his new venture, Brian Dolman was quickly befriended by Moore.
I went up in the projector with him a few times, really, and he used to tell me all about how this worked, how the films were made, and how the projectors worked, and what lighting you needed and what positions you had to be in. He was very, very intense.
One of Moore's most popular screenings was the Saturday Cinema Club, a chance for parents to drop off their kids whilst they did their weekend shopping.
People would bring their children to the cinema, and Peter would look after them till they came back. He thought the world of all the children, and he was keen to please them and make them happy to come to the cinema. He was a real gentleman.
But there was a darker side to the cinema owner.
I can remember now he started selling dubious videos, sleazy. You certainly wouldn't have walked out of them under your arm.
A man who was well known. Nobody could have guessed that he had such a secret. a dark side to his personality.
I was aware that he had a liking to wear leather clothes and had this nightlife that he didn't display in front of his mother. She was totally unaware of that side of things.
When he went out, he was always dressed in black. It was his trademark, the long black leather coat, either a black or a dark grey shirt, a black tie, black trousers.
And as he cruised the local streets, no one could have imagined the secret life that was unfolding in the increasingly twisted world of Peter Moore. During September 1995, the peaceful communities on the Isle of Anglesey were shattered by the brutal murder of local man Henry Roberts. Only the sighting of a van offered a potential clue to police as they hunted down the sadistic killer. Two months later, he struck again.
Keith Randalls was living in a caravan. He was acting as a road traffic safety officer while some construction work was carried on there.
We enjoyed each other's company. You know, he was a fantastic guy. Fantastic. We'd do raffles and anything to get some money in, because we used to send it off to hospitals and stuff like that. We used to take the old age pensioners on coach trips.
He was a very happy-go-lucky sort of person.
Very dry sense of humour, isn't
Yes, very dry sense of humour. Everybody who met him, everybody that knew him, seemed to like him.
With Christmas only a matter of weeks away, the 49-year-old was looking forward to visiting his daughter Lisa and her family.
We did have a really long conversation and he was really happy and upbeat and looking forward to Christmas because he was coming to ours for Christmas dinner.
Family meant the world to him.
On the night in question, Keith had decided to treat himself after a long day at work.
He'd been into Llangefni. I think he'd had a pint in the pub and then bought some chips and had come home with a bag of chips back to the caravan.
The following morning, Keith's work colleagues turned up to the site as usual. But something was very wrong.
It was a busy road site and the guys would come back next morning to start the day's work. And they found Keith's body outside of the caravan and contacted the police.
As detectives arrived on the scene, it would immediately become apparent that Keith Randalls had been the victim of murder. All the signs suggested he had suffered a prolonged, vicious attack.
The evidence showed that Keith had come out of the caravan, which is here, and that a scuffle had sort of taken place in this area here, and there were signs of a big struggle. And as they were fighting, Keith was getting stabbed repeatedly, and yet he was still managing to fight. And Keith was left to die here, where we're standing now.
He was pulled out of his caravan, killed without any mercy at all, in a completely motiveless attack.
You can imagine Keith thinking, you know, when somebody knocks on the door of the caravan, they're lost and they want some information. You know, not somebody gonna stab 9 times.
It completely tore us all apart. It was just something that you read in the newspapers, but it's not something you expect to happen to your family. And especially to sort of person that my dad was. He was never offensive to anybody. I couldn't see how anybody would want to do him any harm.
The brutal stabbing bore all the hallmarks of the recent killing of Henry Roberts, less than 10 miles away.
The police had to look at the possibility that there was one person responsible for both murders. Both males, both live alone, both stabbed to death. Again, a van had been sighted. A van was sort of prevalent in both murders. Possibly the offender was using a van to travel across the island.
Just an hour's drive east, Kinmel Bay businessman Peter Moore was now living on his own, following the death of his beloved mother 19 months previously.
When Mrs. Moore passed away, Peter was heartbroken and he became quite introvert. He seemed to have a lot of pent-up anger, which I never could understand why. But I just felt that he's grieving for Mrs. Moore, grieving for his mum.
As Moore's hardware shop began to struggle, the lifelong film enthusiast had thrown himself into his true passion and opened a third local cinema in Holyhead, Anglesey.
I think Peter probably did want to build an empire. I think he probably had a vision that he would open lots of old cinemas and wake them up.
At that time, there was great interest in North Wales because this was the man who was resurrecting the cinema trade.
But in reality, the cinema business was struggling, and Peter Moore's private life was also spiralling out of control.
Once his mother died, he became entrenched in the S&M underworld because it wouldn't matter to him if he was discovered. He would not lose his mother's love because she was dead.
I don't want to imagine what went on. I heard noises and I've heard neighbours talk about, things that they'd heard and suspected. But I cannot believe that this house turned into a house of horrors.
People just saw him as probably, a cinema buff, and they didn't know really what was inside of him, which was the real thing in terms of domination, sadism, and inflicting pain and horror and hurting people and frightening people. That's who he was.
And as Peter Moore's secret life of sadism continued, he would decide to treat himself as he reached his 49th year.
For his birthday, he bought himself a present, and the present was bought from a shop in Rhyl. And it was a commando dagger in a sheath.
Three months later, in December 1995, Anthony Davis became the third man to be murdered in North Wales within a matter of weeks. For Detective Constable Dave Morris, there was no doubt that the Anglesey killer had struck again.
There were some striking similarities to the previous two murders. There was a lone male, alone at night, and had been stabbed to death.
The latest killing had been perpetrated on Pensarn Beach, a known meeting point for gay men, and the scene of several violent assaults over the preceding years.
They did immediately appeal to the gay community for information through the press.
And within a matter of days, the police received an anonymous tip-off.
A gentleman described being approached by this man in black leather on Pensarn Beach and taken to an address in Kinmel Bay. At that address, he was badly assaulted. He'd been beaten, he'd been lashed, and he believed that he was going to die at the house and was lucky to get away with his life.
As an ex-Bobby on the beat, Detective Constable Morris was tasked with finding the house in Kinmel Bay.
The caller gave a description of the house, and he described as you drive along the coast road to the traffic lights in Kinmel Bay. I loosely followed the description to the traffic lights. You turn right, and the house is on the right-hand side.
And the house that lay before him was a familiar sight. It belonged to local businessman Peter Moore.
I was able to make the connection. Peter Moore lives in that house. I know Peter Moore's a gay man. I know Peter Moore wears black leather because I've seen him. So I formed the opinion that he was a very good suspect.
Police then established that Moore was hiring a van that matched the description of those witnessed at the murder scenes. He was arrested. A knife was found in the van, and as police entered Moore's family home, they found evidence linking him to the murders of Anthony Davis, Keith Randalls, and Henry Roberts.
In the hallway downstairs, Tony Davis's coat was hanging up. It had been washed. Underneath the settee in his living area, they pulled the video recorder out and it corroborated with the serial number of the video recorder taken from Keith's caravan. There was a swastika flag hanging up in this bedroom. He'd actually taken that swastika flag from Henry's property.
Sexual murderers will very often take souvenirs or trophies from a crime scene, and they do it so that they can relive the crime by using the object that they took as a stimulus for their fantasies.
Inside the once grand Darlington house, investigators would find further evidence of Peter Moore's secret life.
In the house, there was all sorts of unusual things. There was whips, there was rubber truncheons, there was German helmets, German caps, and there was signs that S&M activity had been taking place in the house.
There'd be blood splatters on the walls and on the ceilings that marked the place where the blood had landed from, some sort of whip or something similar that would flick blood onto the ceiling.
It was so incongruous. You had these things like truncheons and uniforms there alongside fluffy toys on the bed.
And the unusual thing was that all the rooms had various signs of the S&M interest, but his mother's bedroom was kept intact. Even in death, he had the respect for his mother to keep it out of her bedroom.
But the sadist hadn't finished inflicting pain, and the friends and families of the victims would be next to be subjected to his cruelty. In December 1995, local cinema owner Peter Moore had confessed to the sadistic killings of 3 men in North Wales. Now in custody, Moore appeared to be revelling in the limelight.
He came out of Colwyn Bay cells into the prison van, and under normal circumstances, the offender's covered. But when he came out, he almost looked at the cameras and seemed to wallow in the fact that he was the man that's done it.
He would pose and he would smile. I mean, he was a very wicked man.
Looking on in pain and horror were the loved ones of the men whose lives he had viciously snuffed out.
He was televised a lot and shown in pictures a lot, and it could be quite distressing putting the telly on to see him waving his arms about.
I can remember seeing the picture of him on the telly with his cuffs on and kind of making a gesture of his hands in the air like that, you know, and I'll never forget that.
I think he just enjoyed being the center of attention. It was his 15 minutes of fame. The cameras were there and they were rolling, and he was going to put on a show.
Moore had confessed to the 3 murders, as well as over 50 assaults carried out in North Wales. But the exhibitionist didn't want the show to end.
He told us about a 4th murder, a murder that we weren't aware of. We didn't know about the murder of Edward Carthy at the time that we were investigating the other murders. It was very much a revelation to us, really.
Moore provided a detailed map, pinpointing exactly where he had cruelly knifed to death the vulnerable man in the tranquil beauty of a forest.
I think there was an element of him exercising his control, his domination over the police. There's no doubt that he got some form of pleasure from telling us about a murder that he committed that we didn't know about. Basically, literally one he got away with.
The reason that Moore, when he confessed, actually revealed another victim that the police did not know about is because now that he's caught, he wants to take charge, and he wants to be quite infamous and notorious.
Peter Moore faced trial for the 4 murders in November 1996. In court, his brazen behaviour would become an increasingly harrowing experience for the victims' families.
Every time he talked and we were watching him, he'd have eye contact with us. And he kept looking at us with a smirk on his face.
I couldn't help it. I had to look at him, and he just looked straight back at me, and there was just nothing but what looked like humour behind his eyes. Yeah, he was just smirking.
He was absolutely enjoying every minute. It's as if he was on stage.
He thought himself a Hollywood star. Going to and from the court, you'd see a big smile and his hands in the air. Look at me, I'm Peter Moore. I'd bloody give him Peter Moore.
Despite his bravado, Peter Moore was found guilty of all 4 murders and sentenced to life in prison.
He didn't look remorseful once. There was never any hint at all of any upset or anything from him.
Ultimately, one question remained. Was Peter Moore's murderous campaign the final act of a sordid and violent script? Or was he born to kill?
The attacks may have been motivated because of his relationship with his father as a child growing up. He was attacking men in the late 50s, 60s, possibly, as you could argue, his father's generation. The majority of the guys were all coming home from the pub. Peter made it quite clear to me that he didn't approve of drinking alcohol. His father drank alcohol. He didn't like his father drinking alcohol. He was attacking his father's way of life. He was attacking his father, basically.
Individuals like this, they don't wake up one morning and say, I think I'll go out and kill 5 women or 5 men and torture them to death. That sounds like a good thing. No, this begins 10, 15, 20 years earlier in the offender's mind, in his fantasies.
I do think Peter Moore was born to kill. I think the attacks throughout the 1970s and the 1980s were preparation for what was to come. I think it was always inside him. And once he'd committed that first murder, there was no going back then.
I think he was born to kill. He went out intentionally to harm people. For whatever reason, he was out to kill.
I think bad men come up with excuses. There is no excuse for what Peter Moore did.
I would say he had the predilection to become a killer simply because of the way he naturally took on the sadistic role. He certainly was vulnerable to becoming a killer.
Whilst Peter Moore remains safely locked away to this day, the pain of his murderous spree still touches the loved ones of those innocent men who lost their lives.
We have a lot of family get-togethers, and we are close family, aren't we? So any special occasions, any events that happen, he's always missed. He should be there, and he would have been there. So he's always missed.
And we've never been able to move on. I think we've got to the stage now we just live with it. I know my wife misses him. I see her of a night time sitting there and I can see the tears. That's how much she misses him. Anthony's memory, that's what we live for now.